I don't know. I think your description was pretty good actually, because there are
Few.
technical specifications about what happens when your device attaches to the radio, to the core, and all this sort of stuff, and sets up the slice. But actually, trying to figure out, really what it is and what it means is not easy. And even the definitions are kind of float around and move around a bit, even within the sort of technical documentation. So it's not, there's lots of definitions that are a bit like yours, I would say.
Well, if they've got as far as me when it comes to defining these things, we're all in the shit. Hello and welcome to another Telecoms.com podcast. It's been a little bit longer since the last one because I think, Pierre, you were in Vegas, weren't you?
Yeah.
How was Vegas? Do I have to say Vegas baby and all that sort of cliches?
It was interesting. It was my first time.
Oh, your first Vegas? It's a fucking weird place, isn't it?
I can't believe that you've not been there before.
Yeah, everyone said that. I'm like, why?
Yeah, why
really
would I make
away.
a point of going to this bizarre Disneyland for grown-ups?
It was so weird. It was very...
And you won some money.
I won some money, yeah.
On what game were you
Roulette.
playing?
That's all I can... Like,
right.
Jeff Bongano tried to explain craps to me. And
I still can't get my head around
Is
craps.
that the long table where they...
Yeah. It looks cool.
It's the one where whenever they do like Vegas montages, it's someone throwing the dice and beautiful women are sort of patting them on the back. And stuff.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen in roulette, does it?
No.
But Mike Dana
but roulette's just I suppose they're all games of chance, but like things like blackjack, you feel you have some agency. Yeah. Whereas roulette, you're just going, I don't know.
Yeah, and it's tricky because there was American roulette and European roulette. So European roulette has 1-0, and the American one had a 0,
and
a double zero, and then the casino's logo. So it's really...
So they're just hedging it in favour, because no one ever bets on those. Well, rarely.
No, I bet on the European one, yeah.
Yeah. No, what I'm saying is the reason they put in the zeros is because then if you bet on red or black, you lose 50-50. Either way if it lands on that. Yeah. So they're just increasing the odds. Typically Yanks to rinse the public even more. That's the thing I don't like about Vegas. I'm obviously not having a go at Americans, I'm just joking, but I just find when you're in Vegas, the rapaciousness of it, the extent to which every step you take, there seems to be something geared to just party with your cash as quickly and efficiently as possible, and then spit you out into the airport and go, come back when you earn some more. Yeah, it just does my head in.
It's an apologetic. But like I saw this girl at the bar. Even at the bar, they have screens so you could play like digital blackjack.
Yeah.
I saw this girl. She asked her husband, like, "Can I have some money?" He gave her $100. She fed it all in the machine. And I watched her, like, slowly but surely, like, lost it all in, like, 10 minutes. Just, like, slapping the button, like hit. And it was, like, 95, 92, 93, 90. And it's just, like, lost it all in 10 minutes. Didn't blink an eye. Like, whatever.
But you were up on your gambling.
I lost some money the day before, but then I made it... I'm basically $50 up on
Go
these.
on.
Yeah.
Well done.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And Mike Dana was there to witness.
Mike Dana was there to witness your high rolling.
Yeah, I think he was my lucky charm.
And before we go any further, we should say that we do have a special guest on this week. Delighted to have Gabriel Brown, who is an analyst. I think you senior principal analyst. I mean, it doesn't get much higher than that. After that, it's God, isn't it? Senior principal analyst, heavy reading, which it's not a coincidence that it sounds like light reading because it's part of the same stable, and we're all part of the great big Informer stable. And have we had you on before, Gabriel?
Yeah.
We have. Okay.
Quite a long time ago.
Exactly. I was saying we've been talking about getting you, I should say, back on for a while. So it's good to have you. And we had to dick you around a little bit because we couldn't do it last Friday because of Vegas, and then we were going to do it on Wednesday, but then there's a train strike, and then Thursday we couldn't do for some reason.
Orange's little get together.
Yeah, and anyway, so here we are on Tuesday. And I better not faff too much because, as ever, Pierre's got the hard cut off. Ian, I gather you're not feeling 100%. You got a little bit of a bug.
Yeah.
You're going to give us all coronavirus, you bastard.
I don't think it's coronavirus.
No other illnesses exist, hadn't you heard?
Pretty sure it's not.
It's either coronavirus or you're just being a wimp.
Yeah.
But you were thinking of bailing yesterday, but you feel a bit better today.
Yeah.
And you're having a beer. You're manfully beering up.
I'm okay. Yeah.
Cool.
I'm not that bad.
All right. Well, I'm sure once you get that punk IPA down, you'll be back to top form.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What we're going to chat about, usual review of the weather. It's very autumnal. I'm allowed to say it's autumnal now, aren't I?
Mm-hmm.
Very much so. I can feel it and the days are getting shorter. I can just feel that descent.
It's 35 degrees in Vegas.
It's 35 degrees.
Have you had your heating on at all?
No.
I had it on one night when it got really cold.
We're holding off.
House.
I have it on. Really
I'm all about the layers.
Yeah, I've been doing that, but
yeah.
So there we are.
It's like a threshold that you cross.
And
isn't it?
it's my birthday in 6 days. There's normally a last little nice bit around my birthday, which is 10th of October, and then it's just 6 months of just wrist-slitting misery.
I remember your birthday last year.
We've got that to look forward to. Yeah.
It was quite fun.
God, I got properly damaged at the end of that.
That was a big one, though.
Yeah, I mean, as a regular listener to the pod know, I don't mind a drink, but by the end of that night, about 3 or 4 in the morning, I was on properly wobbly legs, which doesn't happen every day to me. So there we are. Maybe I'll do it again when I'm 60, and it'll be just game over. Cool. All right, we better stop prattling because I've said hard cut off. What we're going to chat about this week. So Gabriel is very knowledgeable along lots of things, but his core area of study and expertise is sort of mobile network infrastructure, especially around what goes on in the base station. Is that right? More or less.
Take that. Yeah,
you'll take that as precise as you're likely to get from me. And so we're going to talk about that. I don't think we had a little chat beforehand, but I don't think there's one overwhelming sort of new topic. There's a few things that we speak about regularly on the pod, for example, standalone 5G, Open RAN, that sort of thing. So I think we'll touch on those things. And where I really look forward to hearing Gabriel's point of view is, of course, he knows more about it than certainly I do, and dare I say, than Ian does. So we'll all sort of just learn a thing or two, hopefully. No pressure, Gabriel. And if you say anything I already know, I'm going to go, boring, heard it. So it'll be completely groundbreaking. And then as far as news goes, I mean, we got to yesterday, I was writing, I didn't get to see whether you wrote about it. So Vodafone's admitted it's chatting to CK Hutchinson, which is the owner of Three, about them potentially merging in the UK, which is a big deal. It's about the only big telecoms mega merger left sort of on the table, really, if you don't count TalkTalk.
Yeah.
And I suppose there's some you could.
When they're not allowed to do it, they're going to go, "What do you expect us to do then?"
Well, quite, basically. And that's something that definitely come up in the conversation, because I think that's what they're already pleading is the "oh, go on, otherwise we're fucked" argument.
Yeah.
So we'll chat about that. I mean, Ian, we didn't have much preamble because we had to start quite quickly. I only turned up about 10 minutes ago. I don't know if you've written about anything in the past week.
I had a trip, like when he was in Vegas.
Oh yeah, where'd you go?
At the same time, Paris,
an Orange thing.
Yeah, Orange Business Services specifically.
Okay, yeah,
we
met
their new CEO. He's
sure.
quite impressive.
Okay, well, we'll chat about that then.
I went to Paris as well. In Vegas.
I went to the oldest cafe in Paris.
Ooh.
Called Café Procop or something. It's in Saint-Germain, and it's dates back to 1686.
Wow.
So there's like little things in, like, Rousseau sat here when he was writing the social
Is that like in
contract,
England where there's about 400 oldest pubs in England?
Yeah, I think this is really genuinely old, though. It does have like...
Hemingway farted on this chair.
Yeah. There's like that one in...
Civil War was plotted.
There's one on Fleet
here.
Street, isn't the oldie Cheshire Cheese?
Yeah.
It's like a thing where peeps were supposed to have sat.
Right.
So there's a little bit of that going on here,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
it is genuinely like... They've got like recipes that are still from, the sort of 1700s, and it's really amazing food, yeah.
Cool.
So...
Well, those. I
can't fault Orange on taking you out for a nice meal.
Good, nice one, Orange. Yeah, I had a quick tangent. Years ago, my dad's a military historian, and years ago, me and him went and drove along the Western Front of the First World War. A bit of sort of war nostalgia, for want of a better word. And Belgium food, once you get past steak and chips,
Yeah,
I mean, it's actually surprising how shit the Belgians are at food, considering they have a border with France. But France is funny. France, if the French think they're serving French people, you'll get great food. But if they think there's half a chance you just come across the channel, they'll give you slop. They're completely shameless. I know Pierre's shaking his head in disagreement. And of course, you're from the part of France where a lot of English people go. But my personal anecdotal experience is that once you go off the beaten track, the food just improves enormously. And when we're going down around sort of Dun and the Somme and that sort of thing, as long as we went somewhere that was touristy, you just get these prix-fixe, is that what they call it? Prix-fixe? Just a set meal for certain man. It's just all brilliant.
In unassuming places as well.
Yeah, and you get what you're given, but it's all lush.
Yeah.
Much as it pains me to admit it, the French reputation for cuisine is well earned. Yeah. So much so that they invented the word for it. So there we are. That just means kitchen, doesn't it?
Sure.
So anyway, I digress once more. So I think I'm going to start, Gabriel. You weren't on the pod, but I don't know if you heard it, sort of name-checked you a few pods ago after we'd been out with BT. And we were all in their big, Star Wars boardroom, and asking various questions. And I noted that you asked the questions about standalone 5G. So that the theme of their whole thing was just talking about their plans for sort of network infrastructure development, rollout, whatever.
And you asked old stuff down.
And you asked some, for me, quite technical questions about standalone 5G. I'm not necessarily going to ask you to revisit that, although you're welcome to if you want. But I just thought, given that I think I understand what the point of standalone is. It's a new sort of core, new sort of infrastructure all the way through, rather than putting 5G sort of radios on top of 4G infrastructure, and do correct all of that if I got that wrong. But I'm still not entirely sure, not so much what the point of it is, because obviously a more technologically advanced infrastructure is bound to have some benefits, but how urgent it is, what good it'll do the industry, what unique things could be done with it, that sort of thing. So I just wonder if we could start with a bit of a standalone 5G, what's the point of it, Gabe, sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think the best or sort of most interesting question you have there is how urgent is it?
Right.
And as well as we get into what are the benefits and all of that, which is a little bit more. There's a long list, but how significant they are, I could talk all podcast about it. I think BT are pretty much, in terms of their timeline, pretty much representative of most of what you can think of as the leading cohort of operators worldwide. Now, there are a few who are totally on it and a little bit further ahead, but of most of the leaders, there's a kind of a cohort, and they're in and around about the same sort of phase and time frame and things like that. Which is to say, none of them have actually given their date when they're going to launch it and things like that. There's still quite a bit of don't want to commit in case they have to row back, because there's quite a few challenges and decisions still to be made.
Is there a big switch? Is there a moment where they got to flip the switch, and it could all just go Pete Tong?
No. Not if they do it correctly, but that is, of course, what they're worried about.
That's what they've got to make sure they get right. Yeah.
And I think getting it right is more important than being fast, and so no, if they do it right, that shouldn't be a problem. The risk is with a core network, though, you can take out your entire country if you have some kind of a problem. So that's why they're very conservative.
Major. But I guess it's going to be sitting alongside NSA for a while anyway. It's not like you just go from one to the other. You'd have the two of them.
Do you get a parallel?
You'd have the two of them running.
Probably for probably at least another decade or something.
Oh, right.
So it's going to be a long time.
Oh, so there isn't a hard flip?
Not really.
Right.
Because unless you've got 5G everywhere, I mean, we were talking about this, and it's in your very good blog that went up on the site a few days ago. I can't remember when, but you have to have, as I understand it, you have to have pretty much 5G everywhere to be able to have standalone everywhere.
So you can't have 5G radio.
And coverage isn't that great at the moment in a lot of countries.
You couldn't run 4G radios on 5G standalone core. Is that right?
Wow, you're really getting into a major issue.
Okay.
From about 3 or 4 years ago.
Right, stumbling blindly into it in my case.
That is a whole other story.
Okay. Kettle of fish.
There's lots to talk about. I mean, the thing at the moment is when I don't know if you've got your 5G phone.
I don't
just
yet.
Sitting there and it's just doing its thing.
Okay, well I never see 5G.
Well, there
come
you go.
Up on
So
it.
if you get even if you do a little web browse or you get a message or anything like that, nearly certain it's not actually on 5G at that point. So it's it looks like 5G on the logo, but it's just sitting camping, as they call it, or on the 4G. And because until you do a really big download, which you never do, who really does, it's just sitting there on 4G, and it's not triggering up to work on 5G, if you see what I mean. So,
I see.
Does the phone do that then?
The phone does it, but only when you've got a big enough request.
So that decision's made on a local level.
It's a mixture of the phone and the network.
But basically, there's no point in them having you plugged into 5G, which for consumers is basically just a bit more bandwidth, really, isn't it? All the other bits, all the other qualities we associate with 5G right now, I don't think make themselves felt at consumer smartphone user level.
Although Standalone's supposed to change that, isn't it?
Right, okay. Well, maybe I should stop interrupting and let you...
Yeah, maybe a little bit. I don't know quite how much it'll be. I mean, consumers don't even, apart from speed tests, we don't really notice that either. Do you see what I mean? So it's kind of, even that isn't necessarily there. But I think Pierre's talked about this before, by virtue of refreshing and investing in new infrastructure, obviously, that generally speaking, also upgrading 4G and everything. You've got new equipment, so your performance and your site is all getting upgraded. So actually, the user experience for everybody is going up. So if you think of it that way, that it's just a constant upgrading of the infrastructure, then we're all benefiting and we're all getting more data.
And there's usual weird little increments of data that they put in press releases, like you can download a movie in 1 nanosecond now. Isn't that great? Hasn't it changed your life?
Depending on the app, though. I mean, like Spotify, if you try to download a podcast, it still takes like minutes, even though it should take 2 seconds.
Will that be to do with things like caching and CDNs and that sort of thing?
I don't know.
But isn't one of the arguments with Standalone that you're supposed to open up some of these new features of the core, like network slicing, and better latency than you get on lower latency than you get on the non-standalone version, that then could lead to new types of application, and that's the big hope, isn't it?
These are all kind of potentially interesting things you could do with it. Yeah. Doing a study at the moment on network slicing, actually.
Right.
It's
another long discussion, but
Yeah, but that is. So one thing you'll probably be aware of, Gabe, is we're not shy about being sort of sceptical about the claims made by the telecoms industry, and that's not because we're hostile to the telecoms industry. It'd be pretty stupid to be the editor of Telecoms.com and be hostile to the telecoms industry, but I am hostile to groundless hyperbole and marketing fluff, because I'm a journalist first and foremost. And so you've had certain claims made for 5G in the last, let's see, 5G's we've probably been in the 5G hype cycle for at least 5 years, haven't we? I would say. And network slicing is one of them. And my understanding of network slicing is it's a way of sort of dynamically optimizing and specializing the network to perform certain tasks or deal with certain specializations, which if it presumably is dependent on, back to the standalone core, presumably is dependent on a standalone core to be done properly. So I'm right so far, yeah? Tell us a little bit about network slicing as it stands, the claims versus the reality, how big a deal it is.
You're right. It requires the 5G core and the standalone, and that's and so it's one of the sort of the kind of hero services, the hype services that come. Why 5G is better than 4G. It's often used as an example.
Yeah.
By the same token, people use it as an example of why it's all a hype and you shouldn't pay any attention to it, because it doesn't yet exist, and is it going to be any use anyway? So it's a sort of it's a technology or set of technologies that gets batted around like that by us pundits and everybody else. I don't know. I think your description was pretty good, actually, because there are
few
technical specifications about what happens when your device attaches to the radio, to the core, and all this sort of stuff, and sets up the slice. But actually, trying to figure out, really what it is and what it means is not easy. And even the definitions are kind of float around and move around a bit, even within the sort of technical documentation. So it's not, there's lots of definitions that are a bit like yours, I would say.
Well, if they've got as far as me when it comes to defining these things, we're all in the shit.
Well, in the survey we've done, published in a few days probably, the largest group were people saying more or less, we're working on this. We're trying to figure out what it means.
This is a survey of what? Telecoms professionals?
Telecom operators. People who work in telecom operators. And the biggest group was saying, we're trying to figure out what it is and how it might work for us.
We're still getting our head around it.
The thing I don't quite get about it is it sounds like a sort of nifty thing to be able to do. And maybe improve. There's a better way of managing, services, and you can provide guarantees and security and privacy in a sort of more controlled way. But it doesn't sound like. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but it doesn't sound like the sort of thing that necessarily excite people buying 5G services. I'm not. Are you going to go and ask for a slice? Are you going to say, I want my service to do this and this?
Yeah, all of this is like good questions that don't have brilliant answers at the moment. But the idea that people would buy slices, I don't think that's borne out by the research.
Telenor says it has customers requesting slices.
Yeah.
And it was a guy called, I'm going to pronounce his name wrong now because it's not Turge, but it's spelt Turge.
Terje
Jensen. You'll know him.
Terje.
He said some of their enterprise customers, and I think because the CIOs are obviously quite clued up and have read about it, they've actually gone out and asked for a slice, but it's never going to be the sort of thing that in a consumer context anybody'd ask for, is it? You wouldn't go, I want a slice. You just say, I want a decent gaming service that doesn't crash.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
And my data doesn't go to Samsung while I'm playing it.
No, so obviously the consumer wouldn't buy the slice, but presumably some conversation happens at some kind of CTO level or whatever. If you are, let's say, a cloud gaming provider, doesn't the acquisition and the utilization of the slice happen at that level?
Yeah, so it's more of an enterprise thing. But even then, I'm not sure that all enterprises would be saying we want a slice. They might just be saying we want something that's dedicated and works well.
Just want a service. And how you go about it.
The other time when people have raised questions about network slicing to me is when, in the sort of private networks context, you've got companies doing a lot themselves and maybe even putting a core network in, and they've got their own spectrum and they've got a sort of, they've gone a lot further in terms of having kind of their own network. It sort of seems to shut out network slicing from a bit of the market that it probably wanted to target a few years ago.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, on our survey, we can make your own mind up about it when you read it, but the top sort of service people wanted to use it for, not sure how much I agree, but this is what the result was pretty clear, was a way to sort of connect your private networks that you're talking about all together. If you've got lots of them,
right,
and you've got lots of people or trucks or machines or all kinds of gadgets, devices, services moving between them, you could put them all together into some kind of a virtual private network.
Yeah, but
I think there's 3 or 4 big and important things that would have to happen before that's really practicable. So it's quite futuristic.
Yeah, but it was interesting, the BT thing that we went to that was being talked about, because some of you mentioning as well, they didn't really talk about network slicing, did they? They had their sort of list of things that you can do with standalone and interesting stuff, and network slicing wasn't really.
Yeah, for them it was, I think, notable by its omission.
Yeah.
I did notice, though, talking of Orange earlier in Paris, been to Paris twice this year.
Were you at the Paris thing with Ian?
No, different thing. But
there was any reporters, and only 2 other ones of those besides me.
Really? Yeah. Not oversubscribed. Okay.
The Paris is really good for vegetarians now.
Is it?
To what it used to be, yeah.
I don't care.
But back to Orange Belgium. They made their announcement, and it's a kind of a Orange property that they used to. They launched a service in one of their networks, and it's Belgium this time, 5G core, and they made a big emphasis on it. So I think it depends a bit on the operator, how far along they are.
In their case, was it just that they had everything lined up, all their ducks sort of lined up? They got the rollout, they got the spectrum, they had, they're in a situation where they could do it more easily than other bits of the Orange group. Because like you say, a lot of those challenges to do with power, you were talking about the uplink power even is a big issue, and spectrum refarming is a massive job, isn't it, when it comes to launching standalone? And
so there's loads of things you have to do, as we talked about. Yeah.
Why is spectrum refarming an issue with standalone?
Well,
that was the question he asked that I didn't understand. Was it to do with that and needing?
No, that was carrier aggregation.
Right. Okay. Then why
but it does kind of link in.
It does link in. Why? Because so my understanding of non-standalone, which is, as I in my language put it earlier, which is sort of 5G radios on a 4G sort of underlying infrastructure, if the radio is the same, then isn't the spectrum being used the same? So why does the change in the underlying infrastructure change anything to do with the spectrum? I don't understand, Gabe.
Why did it need to do the refarming?
Yeah.
Because over time, if you have more devices of 5G devices, they're going to use that capacity basically. So you want to gradually, as your number of devices come in, you want to gradually shift your capacity over.
Right.
But there's a certain point where you're in a difficult point at the moment where most of the devices are LTE or not SAK, so it's difficult at the moment to allocate too much spectrum to your 5G users. But as you go to standalone, you have to do carrier aggregation. You've gradually got to move the customers and the spectrum over with
Understood.
And it's just a really complicated thing that, and it's really where mobile operator, technology department earns their money. It's
The carrier aggregation thing, if I remember rightly, specifically was about how much you can do, isn't it? They want. I think they were saying they want 4 carrier aggregation as a sort of basic minimum, and they're pushing for 6 carrier aggregation in future. So
yeah, they were talking about that for a sort of a consumer, like
for
a smartphone
market,
service.
Yeah.
And just to make sure I understand carrier aggregation properly, I know it's been around for ages, but this is just sort of parallel bits of spectrum, chunks of spectrum. So a typical smallest increment of spectrum is 5 megahertz, isn't it? That you'd get to get a signal or to get some data. Anyway, something like that. And so you could have parallel chunks of that or larger chunks as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I always think of, it's the old metaphor of sort of pipes. Talk about fatter pipes. For me, carrier aggregation is a bunch of individual parallel pipes. Is that a correct way of interpreting it?
Yeah, more or less.
Again, in my language.
Yeah. Cool. It's all getting really complicated now because you've got different technologies, 4G and 5G, maybe in the same bands. You've got different channel sizes, 20 megahertz, 100 megahertz, 40 megahertz. And you've also got TDD and FDD that you're trying to put together. You might even have millimeter wave.
Yeah.
So it's all getting epically
I know. Every time I write one of those, like someone like Nokia claims a new speed record because in some incredibly controlled environment they managed a zillion megabits per second.
Yeah.
And that's normally just cobbling together shitloads of carrier aggregation and this, that, and the other.
Yeah, in a lab somewhere with one user.
Yeah, and you got to get your head around it. Oh, yeah, and anything that got in the way just got fried. Actually, that's not helping the old cliche about radio waves being bad for you, is it? I'm perpetuating.
But I suppose this is
damaging myths.
One of the reasons why they're trying to shut down a lot of this 3G especially is the one that a lot of operators seem to have targeted, isn't it, for switching off in the next. I don't know if BT came up with I think they did, didn't they? They had a sort of deadline they're working to try and switch off all their 3G stuff, and Vodafone
and they had that
aggressive target as well. But that kind of ties in with the standalone shift, doesn't it?
And they had that PTSD network that they had to sort out.
I tell you what, talking about 3G, there's a really nice link there.
What are you prompting me to notice the link? What is that link?
Well, I was just thinking 3G was there was that company called 3 that.
Oh, I see that link.
Named itself after the technology.
Don't try and impose segues on me. I'm running this fucking podcast. Well, thank you very much. We'll get there, mate. But yes, 3 was. It's funny to name your whole mobile phone company that you presume you want to last more than a decade after one generation.
Yeah,
Maybe they thought 3 was going to be the last generation ever.
Right.
It's going to be so good that there wouldn't be a need
GSMA?
Yeah, well, there is that.
Yeah. Is there anything, because in terms of the service aspects of standalone, I guess, and it allowing you to do whizzier services, if you take forget about network slicing, but are there other things that it potentially opens up to do with latency to me has always seemed more a case of where you kind of build out your resources to some extent and shortening totally, yeah.
I think there's loads of things, but it's pretty hard to pin down, right? If someone says, right, what's it going to be?
Yeah.
I'm going to be like, I don't really know. And so the temptation is say, it's a nonsense. Let's come back when it's a bit more concrete.
Yeah.
But as with all these things, it does take quite a long time to develop, create the capabilities, experiment a bit, get a few things wrong, get it right.
it strikes me that at times like this, where lots of things are sort of a work in progress, it's probably a good time to be an analyst, because I would have thought if I was someone who paid for an analyst service, it would be to help me work out things that are ill-defined or uncertain or in the balance or something like that. So I think, it's totally right and honest of you to be continually pushing back and saying it's complicated, because at this stage it is.
Yeah, I mean, there's never any shortage of things to analyse that are complicated or people don't really know. It's like,
You're not going to have one day where you go, no, I've done it.
But also,
I've clocked 5G.
It's also worth checking, like, how much you got wrong or right 5 years ago or something.
Oh, well, now you're setting yourself up. Go on then.
Well, the only reason I bring it up is I saw this. I was looking through internet. I was looking for something or other, and it popped up something that I'd produced like 5 years ago for someone on 2017. It was on 5G before it'd been standardised and whatnot. And some of it came out pretty well, and I was like, this is I'm quite pleased with myself here, blah blah blah. I'll mention it next time anyone asks me. But also some of it was just completely wrong. I was just like, well,
go on, give us your most right and your most wrong.
Well, the most wrong thing is the thing that's stuck in my mind, actually.
Right, okay.
The right stuff is loads of that.
Just God, how long have you got?
The thing that really came out wrong was, again, it was a survey, so you can kind of say whoever got it wrong, but it was the fact there'd be a lot more small cells than massive MIMO. That would be the capacity story. And you could say, actually, that was right, because 5G started in millimetre wave, which is small cells. So you could say, in some ways, we kind of got it right. But not really. The most of 5G capacity is massive MIMO radios. Yeah. So, in that sense, completely wrong. So
on mid-band.
On mid-band, yeah.
Yeah.
And mid-band has still got... So my understanding of one of the reasons why small cells, and you mentioned millimetre wave, it was perfectly reasonable to predict a proliferation of them, is because when you go up in those higher frequencies, the propagation characteristics of the spectrum gets worse. In other words, the range gets shorter and the building penetration gets shorter. So you need small cells to bridge those sort of divides. But I guess, mid-band, which we normally think of as around the sort of 3.5 gigahertz sort of level, that's still all right, is it? You can still do all right from a macro cell.
Well, yeah, that's been the major sort of breakthrough, really, in products and technology in 5G. If there's been a single thing, it's probably that.
Just getting the best out of mid-band.
Yeah.
But is there still any, because, coverage is still a bit of a constraint, isn't it? In terms, I don't know what we're at in the UK now, maybe 50% on some of the networks and a bit less on a couple of the others. But
yeah,
you're building on that 3.5 gigahertz sounds quite a lot higher than they built their 3G networks on, or even their 4G networks. So is that one of the problems around cell edges, say, even? Or
yeah, that is.
Just more,
yeah. But if you think back 10 years or 15, the spectrum was still the same then, obviously. And it was used for like fixed wireless access, where you had to have an antenna on your roof or something like that. Whereas now it's in your pocket, and maybe even comes indoors and things. And that is the massive MIMO technology, focusing the energy.
This is the beamforming sort of feature.
Yeah.
That's another of those sort of quite futuristic sounding things that gets associated. So beamforming is real and it's delivering.
Yeah, but it's another really complicated thing. Where there's this type of beamforming, that type.
Right, I see.
Blah blah blah.
It's so counterintuitive. The thought that you can sort of dynamically and automatically focus a beam of radio on an individual's device, which is what on a specific device, which is my understanding of it. Again, I say all these things fully expecting to be laughed at and corrected. Just sounds like an incredibly technologically advanced thing to be able to do.
It is incredibly technologically advanced. Yeah. I mean, it's all proper. I mean, it's all, even before it gets into technology and all the stuff we talk about, it's mathematicians and all of that kind of
Doppler and all that
working away for a couple of decades beforehand, before it even becomes a technology and then becomes a product and something we end up using.
I know there's so much into it. Like this week, it's not really worth chatting about, but since we did the last pod, they had a changing of the guard at the ITU, the International Telecommunications Union, which is part of the UN. But it wasn't originally. It just started up by itself 150 years ago. The ITU, and that's just one of those places. It doesn't get much press, and probably a good reason, because I'm not aware of it doing that much.
It's not as relevant, I don't think.
Other than giving America +1 and us +44, which is obviously a piss take. Why do they get the 1? Who's +2? Does anyone know who +2 is on international phone codes? No. Anyway, I think +44 is a bit shit. I think we could have done better than that.
Or +33.
Well, no.
That's France.
They do
3-3,
the World Radio Communications Conference, or whatever it is. That's under the auspices of the ITU.
But does anything ever come from
they
that?
decide what spectrum bands are going to be allocated to what.
Okay, so it's a sort of global coordination.
And then
of some of these things.
Exactly, and then some countries go off and do their own thing anyway.
Right,
that's not supposed to happen.
Yeah, and they use words like plenipotentiary.
They also
you never hear in any other context.
I know that word. That's
a weird word. They also do a lot on broadband standards.
Right. Okay. So I'm being over skeptical.
Mobile standards. It seems to be groups like the 3GPP and the regional ones under that, like ETSI and was it ATIS in America? I can't remember.
They ultimately, it was IMT, 5G and 3GPP. They worked a thing called IMT, which is set by the ITU. Whether it's such a big deal or not, I don't know. This other argument you hear sometimes is it's a good forum for countries that don't get a shout in other areas. So if
that's a fair point.
If they pay attention to telecoms in lower income countries, etc.
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose the only reason I mentioned it, by the way, before I carry on this tangent, is just another example of quite how many moving parts have to function in order for telecoms to work. And it does make it, thankfully, a really interesting industry to work in. And as someone who's worked more in like consumer tech and that sort of thing, I actually find it more interesting, because consumer tech has a sort of ceiling, like what has Apple just produced, or what's the latest chip that Intel's come out with, all that sort of thing. It's a lot more defined. There are less moving parts. It's dominated by a few sort of single massive players. Whereas so many things have to work in concert for telecoms. It's almost something that gives you sort of optimism that the various countries that spend most of their time sort of being aggressive and unpleasant towards each other. It's a reminder that they're also interdependent. I'm thinking especially like US and China, and perhaps to a lesser extent Russia. They all have to be able to get on for these things to work. So dialogue, I don't think you could ever have a time where there's just no dialogue whatsoever, unless you're going to be a country like North Korea, where the leaders don't care that most of the country's just in the Stone Age most of the time.
They just sent a missile over Japan today.
I know.
I saw that.
They can't get the lights on, but they can menace Japan every now and then. It's all a bit annoying. Anyway, where was I? Yes, but then even the ITU thing got a bit politicized recently, because there was an American and a Russian person in the running. And the Americans won, and that's all spun as a victory for freedom and not authoritarianism and all that sort of thing. It's all very tedious. I hope they don't continue with this, because they had a Chinese person in charge for the previous 8 years.
Right.
No one seemed to have an issue with that, did they? Anyway,
I bet they did.
Yeah, seek muttering. What was I going to say? Oh yeah. So before we move on to other stuff, before we started recording, Gabriel, you sort of lamented the fact that a lot of things that occupy your time we've spoken about quite recently on the pod, but I'm not put off by that, because we haven't spoken about them with you.
Mm-hmm.
And so another area, as someone who's concerned with what goes on in the radio, another very topical area is presumably for you Open RAN.
Yep.
And we chat about that a fair bit. Our angle, again, tends to be sceptical, as it should be, as we're journalists, about not about whether or not Open RAN is a viable thing, but whether or not there needs to be that much emphasis on it. It is a bit politicised by the Americans as well, as is everything by America. I think Americans could politicise getting a toilet, and then we also talk about how truly open it is. That's a strong angle of Ian's, saying how it could still end up just being a small number of major stakeholders in that mix. But just put it over to you, Gabe, in terms of sort of Open RAN. When you're writing reports, or you've got incoming sort of questions from clients or whatever, What are people wondering about Open RAN these days?
All sorts again. I mean, it's one of these things. There's so much to it. I think it's best,
We'll never make a journalist of you, will you?
For the purposes of...
You're not going to be able to write your headlines will be like 4 lines long.
I was a journalist actually once.
Ah, sorry, I take it back. Until you evolved.
I had to put a newsletter out every week.
Oh, right.
Went to print on midday on Friday.
And was it a Telecoms-y journalist thing, similar to what we do?
IP, wireline and wireless week.
Uh-huh. Sounds like one of those ones that would have come up on Have I Got News for You back in the day.
That kind of thing, I always, Open RAN, I think it's best to see it in a context of overall RAN. When you do that, it puts it more in perspective. And you'll probably say, the attention it receives from media, marketing and people chatting about it's probably oversized to, what it merits. Nevertheless, it's very interesting. So basically, I think it's doing a panel on this it is plug-in stuff, but whatever.
You plug away, mate.
So we're organising this event called Network X in Amsterdam.
We'll all be there
in a couple of weeks. Big
we'll
event.
Be doing pod from there.
Loads of people.
Who's on your panel?
Good panel, actually. Talking about Open RAN, it's got a fella from the DCMS, which is a British government department of some form or other. He's been involved in it quite a while. Iron someone.
Iron Mike Tyson.
Iron Gosh.
Oh, right.
But I might have misremembered that. Another fellow called Franz Seiser from Deutsche Telekom. He's properly on top of his brief, as you'd expect. Someone from Vodafone Ziggo in the Netherlands.
Just down the road, I suppose. Might as well get them along.
Yeah, it's a different. What's interesting for them is obviously they have merged.
Skinning up a massive spliff while you're on there.
They've merged, but they're a smaller outfit, than someone like Deutsche Telekom. So he has quite a different perspective. And Per from Viavi. So I'm doing that panel. We've got our own symposium coming up the same week. So I'm going to be at the event, doing that back to my hotel, presenting it online to the online audience.
Do you think, because you just mentioned there that Ziggo is obviously a lot smaller than Deutsche Telekom, it's nice to have the contrast on the panel, but in your sort of conversations with operators generally, do you find that smaller operators are thinking about it really, really differently from, because the big operators in Europe seem to be driving it, don't they? And then whenever I have the opportunity to talk to people who are a bit smaller, some of them seem a bit more wary or sceptical, or it's maybe not ready for them. They don't want to get too involved, and some of them say it's maybe come along a bit too late for 5G. 3's very much had that kind of line, I think, on it. And,
I think broadly that's probably fair enough. I mean, that's there's always exceptions and whatnot, but that's pretty much it. But the basic point is it's been about 5 years now since the ORAN Alliance was formed, maybe 6 or 7 years since this current cycle has been around. Let's call it 5 just for charity's sake. And then if we think, well, it takes 10 years to do anything in telecom, so we're about halfway through. It's like it's too soon to say it's going to kind of fail. It's too soon to say it's going to succeed. It's kind of like right in that zone of.
But you can have some sense technologically. I mean, if it's viable technologically, it seems the political and cultural and commercial will is there. But obviously, if it's shite, it doesn't matter how much political will there is. It's not going to come along. Is it technologically measuring up? Could you confidently, if you were some big operator, could you just go, yeah, that's our strategy, we're going all in, and be quite confident?
You'd be brave. You'd be brave to do that.
Look how many sites Vodafone's turned on so far.
How many?
One.
Our site.
Well, that's one.
What happened to all those ones in Wales they were going to do?
One we know about, but I'm pretty sure there'd be. I mean, the next plan was for a golden cluster, wasn't it? But even that was only 30 sites. So.
But it's all down to definition. Docomo's got thousands of sites, tens of thousands of sites live with some parts of the technology. I think Verizon had an announcement recently. They got. They had 5,000 or 10,000 vRAN sites, so it's not full Open RAN, but it's a stepping stone.
So one's Open RAN, one's vRAN.
Yeah. So
that's a sort of theological divide I haven't fully got my head around.
But you can see you're kind of getting there, and these are the top these are the top operators in the world, and they're they're halfway there and feeling pretty good. But it's not all done, And in the meantime, over 10 years or whatever, everything changes anyway. Like what you set out, if you go and judge something on what you wanted to do day one and where it's all looking, things change, don't they? Because you learnt something, or
so you don't have to virtualize it to open it, which is what Docomo's done in Japan.
Yes,
they have a non-virtualized network that's open. So they have, I think, radios from Fujitsu and maybe a couple of others working with sort of Nokia's baseband.
So the two things are quite distinct, but they often, in some press releases they get conflated.
Well, because I think most people using Open RAN will virtualize as well. You do the two things together generally. I mean, Docomo's not, but I know. But their thing goes back a long time as well. It's not based on ORAN Alliance specs. It's just they got the vendors to work together, basically, as I understand it.
I think it is now on ORAN Alliance specs, but they were doing this for a long time. Yeah. It's another one of these things that's really complicated.
It's weird, isn't it? I mean, again, in my sort of reductive perspective, one of my understandings is one of the reasons you would virtualize, one of the reasons you would conflate the two things is because one of the points of Open RAN is to use sort of off the peg, like chips, non-specialized components. And the more stuff that you've got virtualized and softwareized, the less you require on local component specialization. Do you think is that a reasonable observation for me to make, or am I fucking missing the ball on that one?
I think that is what you hear people talk about stuff like that, and it's like
I'm
part.
Recipient
that's
of this
a
stuff.
part of it, but there's many parts.
Well, there's quite a lot of specialisation going on now in vRAN to overcome some of the performance challenges.
Right.
So you hear people talk about like hardware accelerators and more specialised silicon that you need to take on some of that baseband processing that it's hard for general purpose stuff to do very well. And that's what I don't know. I mean, Gabe will know a lot more about this, but from my perspective, that seems to be one area where there seems to be quite a lot of progress has been made in the last couple of years.
Yeah, I mean, Mike wrote up the
Qualcomm stuff.
Qualcomm story as an example.
Yeah. Intel had some announcement as well, I think, that I didn't get around to doing. Intel had a recent announcement
on a similar sort of area. There's Marvell, there's Nvidia. There's lots going on.
So you got maybe 4 or 5 big chip companies that are involved in doing that sort of thing,
and all of them except Intel being x86. I mean, being ARM microarchitecture focused, aren't they?
Yeah, although they'd still work with.
Right.
You'd still have x86 chips in, and they wouldn't. Those the CPUs would still probably be x86, not ARM based. Not necessarily. I think there are alternatives,
but not many people have an x86 license. I think it's just AMD. So if Qualcomm's doing chips, they've got to be ARM microarchitecture, I think.
No, but their chips they'd be doing an accelerator, but you'd still have an x86 in there. Yeah.
Okay.
To back to your question, so one operator, I won't say the person's name just in case they was saying, they think the Open RAN products at the moment are about 20 to 30% off, 20 to 30% behind what you would get from the state-of-the-art system in the market.
Ericsson, Nokia, whatever.
That kind of thing.
Interesting.
So, that's quite a big gap, but
is it closing, huge. Do we think?
Yeah, well, it's closing.
Yeah.
How far it will maybe
it's a moving target, isn't it?
It's a bit. That's one thing. It's a moving target because everything's getting better. But so then the question is how close can it get, and what other advantages does it have to offset? So then you could see over the next few years it becomes tighter in a decision.
And I guess that's why people talk up things like the RIC, and some of these other elements of the RAN that might give you something that you don't get with the sort of traditional RAN.
Yeah, maybe, but I mean, I think a lot of that is a little bit look over here at the shiny thing to kind of like baffle you and whatnot, and it's a sort of there's obviously some interesting potential, but it's kind of that's a question of the basics have got to get better. First.
I still kind of feel like one of the big jobs is just getting a bunch of people to work together well, and I mean,
cultural as much as anything else.
Yeah, just making. I mean, I know he's kind of got a vested interest in saying it's hard, I suppose. But Tommy Wheato, I've spoken to a few times about this at Nokia, who's basically the head of their mobile business, has said that when you're trying to, and they have obviously done this with Docomo in Japan, I think maybe a couple of other places, but you're opening up your specs to someone else, or even if you're using our online specs, there's still lots of different options that can, for working with somebody, and there's lots of different parameters that have to line up, and it's quite a big job. It's quite hard to do, whereas if you're Three and you just go out, Three UK, the operator, you just go out and buy Ericsson stuff. They've done all that.
Right, they've done the system.
That systems integration stuff, I think, is still, to me, seems to be one of the big.
And I think Nokia and Ericsson have done, on the whole, I think they've done a decent job of how they position themselves on Open RAN.
Yeah.
There were some initial times I remember years ago where you get a little bit of grumpiness from them and just going like, why is everyone so fucking worked up about this?
Yeah.
But in a Swedish accent.
The trouble is they can't criticise it without being sort of. Because I remember at the Vodafone dinner we went to, when they were talking about the one that was quite recent, a few weeks ago, or whatever, when they give their update on their sort of software plan, and I remember raising Tommy Wito's point, and their immediate reaction was to sort of laugh and go, well, he would say that, wouldn't he? So they can't really. That's a problem. Ericsson and Nokia can't really sort of raise criticisms without being perceived to be, like Kodak.
Yeah. Well, exactly, and I think they've done an all right job of walking the fine line of just coming out with generic, vague little, obviously anything that improves the whole overall ecosystems for the best, i.e. keeping their cards pretty close to their chest, which seems like the most sensible sort of comms and strategic position to take.
Still be interested to know what Huawei's doing on all this, but they're the kind of, they're not involved in the specs group, obviously, or are they through other companies? We don't know. Some of those smaller Chinese companies maybe are linked to Huawei, I've heard. But
cool. Well, look, we've done about an hour or so, and I think I'm going to move it on. Although I will before
Have
I
we done
do.
An hour already.
Nearly. We probably started about 10 past, 3/4 now maybe.
51 minutes.
There we go. But before we move it on, Gabriel, and you don't have to say anything if you don't want. But are there any other things in your sphere, in your day job, that are sort of grabbing you?
All sorts, really. I mean, one thing that just sparked maybe a short mention, it's not really my job or anything, but it's topical when you mentioned Vodafone. I saw on LinkedIn the CTO is retiring.
Yep.
Yeah.
Johan Weiberg, and being replaced by Scott Petty, who you've chatted to loads of times, haven't you?
So I thought that's pretty interesting. I mean, I don't really know whether there's a whole inside story on that, but I always thought Johan Weiberg, who came from Ericsson, I think,
I believe so,
did a really good job for Vodafone, partly on their technology strategy and all that, which is his job, but also just kind of having them be a bit more kind of communicative and open and engaged across the industry. And
yeah, I agree.
He himself does quite a lot of that.
We've commended them on that. I mean, although I've got to say, Johan, good luck to you, whatever you're moving on to, but sometimes his PowerPoint presentations are a bit dry.
I think he said it was his last main job. So
really? He's just going to go and chill the fuck out.
He doesn't look very old, but good luck to him,
Yeah.
If he wants to. Well, I'm sure he's going to do something.
He's probably one of these guys who
do nothing.
Who does quite dry PowerPoint presentations, but then if you know him, he's just a nutter.
I've seen him a few times, and he said quite. I mean, the press conferences that we've been to, when they've had proper news there. We're going to hire 7,000 software engineers. They said that at a dinner with journalists.
That's true. No, that's significant.
It's like, why are you doing that? It's like, well, we need to be less dependent on integrators and all this.
But I think it's given his all the teams and whatnot also a little bit of license to be not so huddled in their office and hiding away, but actually just kind of participate in the communities and ecosystems of their part of the network.
Yeah,
I bumped into him in a lift once, and he didn't know I was, obviously, even though I had.
He should.
But he was an absolute gentleman, so
Yeah, and he makes me feel short. He's tall.
He is very tall.
Yeah, he's a tall lad.
No, he's a sound bloke, and I completely agree with you on that. It's basically it's them and BT. So I hope you're listening, O2 and 3. Them and BT that made the effort to sort of get analysts and journalists out. They don't have to get us pissed, although it helps, obviously, and actually engage with us and have, and put their execs in front of, smart asses like me and clever people like you to ask them difficult questions. And I always give companies respect when they do that, because they could just protect their execs, and they don't.
It's also lower levels, just being in the. I mean, they've always been in standards groups, but
right, they're just involved.
Yeah.
So there's a segue. You got your segue in the end. Talking about Vodafone. Sorry, did you have more? Well,
just on that. What do you think of Scott Petty then being in? Because I remember when he first came over to be UK Network something.
Yeah.
From Oz.
Yeah, so he's had quite a rapid ascent, hasn't he?
Well, he came over all kind of like a caustic Aussie, and
right.
I remember him presenting, and he was a bit like, don't mess about with me, don't piss about.
He was giving it large a bit.
Style. But he's really kind of, and I've actually introduced him once on stage, and he's really changed and rounded
polished
and
himself.
kind of grown and polished, yeah. To the point where, he communicates really well.
Well, Ian, you've chatted to him a lot more than I have.
Well, I've been lucky enough at a few of the Vodafone dinners to be put next to him, and then it's like, you're free to sort of chat and ask questions. So, and he's pretty sort of outspoken actually. A lot of
You've
things.
Often mentioned him on the podcast.
Yeah, I mean, I've quoted him a lot, and I've sort of brought out quotes a few times just for context in other stories, because he's just said a few things that are really interesting, and he doesn't sort of shy away from having an opinion.
I think, there's the thing. I've certainly lamented over the years that I've found, and it could just be me, that companies engaging less on a sort of PR level. They seem to protect their execs more, engage less. You just get these bits of propaganda thrown at you, and they seem to expect you to just repeat them verbatim. And even I've only been a journalist 15 or so years, but even I can remember a time where there was a lot more engagement, a lot more toing and froing between companies and journalists.
I would put that a little bit on the journalists and the analysts as well, though.
In what way?
I think journalists were feistier, analysts were feistier than they are now.
Yeah.
I don't think it's just the company. I think quite often the companies, they do want a bit of challenge because it helps them. It's like,
right.
It actually is good for them because they're like,
yes.
I get what
you're saying.
But there's a lot of...
and there's not just the feistiness, there's the proactiveness. I mean, one thing I can relate to, for basically all my time here, I've had typically at most one other permanent writer alongside me. So a lot of the time I'm just thinking, how can I get 3 stories out today?
Yeah.
And that doesn't really lend itself to me picking up the phone that much and being sort of tenacious and doing proper journalism. So that's a shame. But then I think companies could acknowledge the fact that there are fewer journalists expected to produce more content, and move the window a little bit more in our direction and make it easier for us to do that. And people like BT and Vodafone, when they engage, do that, and they get rewarded. They get written up, they get spoken about on the pod, and all that sort of thing. So come on, OT and 3, sort your life out.
I was going to say on the Scott Petty thing, he's not a direct replacement for Weiberg.
Okay.
Because they've sort of divided that
That's
role.
True, they've got another
even
guy.
though his job title is now changing from Chief Digital Officer, I think it is, and Chief Data Officer maybe, to Chief Technology Officer, they've got a Chief Network Officer called... Christ, I can't remember his name
either. Yeah,
but he's,
I can't know how you say it.
So Scott Petty's more in the sort of IT software side of things actually these days than he used to be. And I remember talking to him at dinner about that because he moved from UK CTO into this Chief Digital Data role, and he was saying that's more his background. He's more like a programmer.
Right, and that seems to be a sort of group-wide thing, because you remember we went to a Vodafone thing where it's just UK, and they had Andrea Donna, who was more on the network side, and then the other lad whose name I forget, who was more on the IT
his first
side.
Name, and I can't remember his surname. But
so that's obviously a thing that they do, and that's consistent with their messaging about how we're trying to be more IT savvy.
I think it's Ahmed El Sayed.
That'll do me.
Sorry if I got that wrong, Vodafone.
Cool.
And Ahmed.
So all right. I mean, but I think I don't know Scott Petty very well, but by reputation, certainly from talking to you, Ian, anyone who's a free and open communicator is all right with me. What do you think? Do you celebrate the move?
Yeah.
Cool. Right. Well, on that monosyllabic answer, I'll
sticking with Vodafone.
Yeah, sticking with Vodafone. We finally get your segue in. So this week, that's been rumoured for a while. I'm a big fan of spotting things that I call trial balloons, which is when you get someone like Bloomberg or Reuters or FT or Wall Street Journal or whatever, say sources close to the thing reckon this might be happening. I think it's nearly always a trial balloon, and a trial balloon is a comms technique that people use where they leak something to gauge public reaction to it. I'm sure politicians do it all the time as well. Or we've heard from sources close to the cabinet that they might be trying to make it mandatory to wear purple on a Friday, and then that comes out on the BBC, and then everyone freaks out, and then suddenly that policy disappears. So this is how trial balloons work. And I think we've had trial balloons about Vodafone and 3 for a little while. I was looking back on just some of our journalism we've done for a while, and journalism, for those who don't know, is a commonly used word among my profession to talk about basically reporting on other reports, hence the churn part. So Reuters reports that. It's what people with less resources than Reuters are sometimes reduced to doing. And we've done plenty of journalism over time with these, what I consider to be trial balloon leaks. And then there was one that came out sort of first thing yesterday, which was Monday. Monday the, what was it, 3rd, 4th?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So it's October.
What was it? No, yeah, Monday 3rd. I think it was Sky News that got it, that said, yeah, they're definitely Vodafone Group at CK Hutchison, which owns all the 3 sub-brands, are in chats about merging their UK operations. And then Vodafone soon after came out with one of these, again, which if you've been a journalist for a while, they're familiar to them. They'll be familiar to you, which is where they say, we note recent media speculation on ... And in this case, normally they go, we note media speculation and it's all bollocks. But in this case, they went, yeah, actually, they're onto something.
Yeah.
And so I think, here, I've got the press release here. It's headlined, Vodafone confirms discussions in relation to Vodafone UK and 3 UK. So yeah, that's kind of what it is. They're thinking of merging. The minutiae of how the merge would happen is a bit obscure. They say Vodafone would own 51% and CK Hutchison would own 49% of the combined business. So a bit like EE when that was created with Orange and Deutsche Telekom back in the day.
Yeah, that was 50-50.
That was pure 50-50, was it? Okay. Yeah. And then the next paragraph says the relative ownership would be achieved through a differential leverage contribution at closing, and no cash consideration will be paid. Does that make any sense to anyone?
It's
a differential leverage?
It's just a debt thing, isn't it? It'll just be.
Well, as I said in my piece, leverage I normally take to mean American corporate speak for debt.
Yeah.
So basically, the 2 parent companies will take on different amounts of the debt coming in, and that's how they'll reconcile it. Because presumably, if it was a straight combination, Vodafone would own more than 51% of it, because Vodafone's a fair bit bigger than 3, isn't it? Vodafone UK is a fair bit bigger than 3 UK.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. In the UK,
it would be more like a sort of 60-40 or 70-30 type of thing.
The group would be bigger than Hutchison's telecom business as well.
No, but I'm talking about just the UK, because that's what they're merging. I mean, Vodafone's got more subscribers, more revenue, more everything.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway,
I think it's 17 million customers versus about 9 or 10 at 3, something like that. So together it's about 27 million.
Right, so we'd be looking at like 2/3 Vodafone, 1/3.
So they're the biggest. They would make them the biggest.
So we've got to assume that if this happened, that Hutchison's taking on a bit of debt, so that it could get its 49.
Well, paying Vodafone some money, presumably.
Well, but that's the point. They say, and no cash consideration will be paid. Mm-hmm. So it's all fucking chucking debt about.
It's a bit of a weird thing anyway, isn't it? Like, for Vodafone to own 51% of something is a bit kind of...
Why not own 60?
You're not on the pot or off it. You're in between. And
it's just enough to give them majority control, isn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah. So I knew this would come up on the pod, so I did study it up a bit.
Yeah.
I did see an interesting article. You talk about trial balloons. I don't think this was that, but there was an article in the Telegraph saying... not you shouldn't do it because you're going to put prices up, but it may raise national security concerns, with foreign it's not a foreign takeover, but still a foreign ownership, even though it's a minority stake.
CK Hutchison's a Hong Kong company, is it?
It's a Hong Kong company. Obviously,
which
it owns
is pretty much China now.
It owns a lot of British assets, though.
Yeah.
In not just telecom. But this piece was saying it specifically relates to Vodafone acquired Cable and Wireless some years back, which does a lot of the subsea and international systems, including, I don't think it says this, but as far as I'm aware, certainly at one point it used to connect all the British embassies up around the world and that sort of thing. So I don't know whether there's any risk or truth in it. But what I really it's interesting that came up as one objection.
Maybe that's one of the reasons. Maybe that's one of the reasons for this 51-49 thing, so they can say that it's still majority owned by English people. So don't worry, we'll make sure
something like that.
There's no funny business.
Yeah, but this article saying even that, even because it's only a 1% over, it might not be enough. But who knows?
Yeah, it's a big minority stake.
So that's that's. I mean, the biggest thing about this. I mean, there's basically two conversation points about this. Firstly, the wisdom of the move, and secondly, the likelihood of regulators and competition authorities waving it through. Do you want to give us your thoughts on either or both of those?
Yeah, I think the wisdom of the move, I can see why they want to do it, obviously, because there's long been a conversation in the European markets about too many players. It's good for everybody if there's fewer mobile networks, basically. And you have that, and the subscale points they made, I think they actually specifically said in their statement. I've got
a whole thing to say on that, though.
As Ofcom notes,
Yeah.
Right, okay, I'll let you do your thing afterwards.
Don't worry. Just put a pin in that. I'll come back to that.
I mean, basically, this is one of the things about the telecom sector. You've got 4 mobile networks in a country. They will have to build, you have to cover everywhere as much as possible if they're national networks. You're not going to leave areas unserved. So you'll have similar sort of capital requirements and operating cost requirements. But if you've got one that's only got 5% of the market, then they've got less money to spend. So,
well, you say there's 4 networks, but obviously in practice there's only really 2, isn't that right?
Or passively, yeah, I suppose. Oh, you're talking about the network sharing deals, are you? MBNL and Cornerstone.
Yeah.
I mean, that's another problem with the deal.
Yeah, it's an issue because these two are in different
Yeah,
camps,
I mean, I can see what they want to do. And also Vodafone's been under group pressure to offload some underperforming assets or do mergers. Shareholders are not very happy with its performance over the last few years. So I can see why Nick Reed would want to do this kind of deal.
As a very small Vodafone shareholder, I can attest to the fact they're going in the wrong direction.
It would make them the biggest player in the market. So it clearly gives them scale, 27 million subscribers. Any market you expect, if you have fewer players, the prices can be increased.
Yeah, that's the concern.
There's all sorts of sort of reasons why I think it sort of makes. I can see why they're interested in doing a deal, but one thing it doesn't give them, I think, which was almost a bit of a non sequitur in their release, was this. If you look at what's happened since Three last tried to do a deal in the UK, which was 5 or 6 years ago with O2. O2's now run off and sort of shacked up with Virgin Media.
A bit of skirt.
And EE's now merged with BT, which happened in 2016. I think it was the year that they were talking about that deal. It was almost in response to that. So you've got 2 sort of big converged companies, and they're still not going to have sizable fixed line assets. So for some analysts, I know that's like one sort of red flag. It doesn't give them the fixed line infrastructure that potentially is important. But then I think regulatory-wise, I think they've got all sorts of problems they have to get past.
Ton of obstacles.
I mean, I'd be quite surprised if it goes through, and it's definitely not going to go through without major concessions.
Yeah, right.
I don't think, because I think the spectrum is quite evenly distributed among the 4 operators. Or there's some big skews in certain bands, but even if it's evenly distributed, you put 2 together, and all of a sudden that one company owns 50% of the airwaves, kind of thing, that have been licensed, and it is something like that. It's high 40s that they'd end up with. So that's something that
this is the first time. I mean, the fundamental sort of mergers and acquisitions consideration of this versus the BTE acquisition and the VMO2 thing. Yeah, this is 2 mobile operators.
2 mobile operators. So I think they'd have to give up some of those assets. And then that starts to undermine the rationale for a deal a little bit, depending on what they're required to do.
Yes.
Exactly. And then you just mentioned that the MBNL Cornerstone thing, I think, is an issue. So I get this wrong, but so Three's in a network sharing agreement with
Vodafone in some parts of the country.
Well, okay, but its main one is BT, isn't it, with MBNL, and Vodafone's with O2 in Cornerstone. So if you have this kind of merger, you've got one company that's in both those sort of mainly passive network sharing deals, which I know Ofcom has flagged that as a concern in the past, if there should be a deal where, because they think it could lead to sort of collusion and skew the market. So how they get around that, I don't know. And then I think,
in a way though, that's kind of almost an argument for doing it. It's like they're both building the same stuff at the same place.
Yeah.
Let's take some redundancy out.
And they're both doing okay. 3's an okay network and it's an okay service.
Yeah.
Vodafone's an okay network and an okay service, but neither of them are
kicking ass.
I think
kicking ass, or neither of them are world leading or Europe leading even.
No.
So it's kind of it is just duplicating the
totally
thing.
Yeah. I think politically it'd be, I mean, I don't know if the competition authority looks at things from this perspective, but I think it would be a really unpopular deal in a lot of ways. It's the sort of thing that people will latch onto and go, they're allowing a big merger to go through that'll cause thousands of job losses, because it will.
A bit like the Tory mini budget.
There's no reason that a mobile network coming together is definitely going to lead to job cuts, and it's also, there's all this concern at the moment about cost of living, wage, inflation, and it's, people automatically think mergers is going to lead to price rises. So that's always a reason that these deals get.
I think there's two layers of protection for the public in terms of price rises. Firstly, two really strong competitors, and secondly, Ofcom and regulation in general.
Yeah,
it wouldn't concern me, but I know that regulators have to be seen to be concerned.
I mean, that's the sort of the religious thing in Europe has been this
got to have
4 versus 3, because if you go down to 3, then it's the market's too consolidated.
Then you're only one step away from duopoly, and then we're all going to die.
And and at a time like now, where we're all worried about people being able to afford to keep the heating on, that just sounds like it's a bit more difficult to sort of it's a bit more political than it was.
I hear you. What about you? What are your thoughts on the move?
I don't know. I mean, like you said, it's been around for a while. I was always against it just from a personal sort of point of view as a customer, on a point of view of is important.
Who are you with?
Well, I'm on Vodafone. I'm not actually. I'm on a thing called Voxy now,
which
is
the used brand
discount version.
Yeah, I did a webinar with the person who runs Voxy.
Oh, did you?
Yeah, I've forgotten her name, but she was very nice.
Yeah, quite a lot to fix on that. But anyway,
okay.
Some
work to do.
But it's all right. It's cheap.
Yeah, what are you doing on a youth brand? No offence.
Cheap.
I was just trying it out. Actually, I thought I'd see how.
You just thought you'd be in with the kids.
So it's sort of the equivalent of gift gaff at O2.
Yeah.
Sort of no frills, like largely prepaid.
I'll tell you what's wrong with it. I'm going to Paris on the Eurostar, and I haven't actually. Normally I've been on Vodafone for many years, and it's all included in your roaming, and you don't have to do anything. So I'm on my way to Paris. I get to Paris, and it's like, oh, you haven't bought your roaming in advance, so you can't use your phone. Please connect to Wi-Fi to buy your roaming pass.
Yeah.
So they won't even give you a little.
So they won't even give me a little
bit
way
of access to buy it.
I had similar issues with the in Copenhagen.
And I'm just like, what are you people? What are you doing? It's meant to be a phone company.
Yeah.
And,
well, I suppose that's consistent with the no frills thing. Like I know we're kind of forced. Like I'm going to be on EasyJet yet again this Friday when I go off to Amsterdam for a stag trip, which is for my colleague Andrew Wooden. Getting hitched. Go on, Andrew. So we'll see how that goes. My first stag trip for about a decade. So we'll see how I hold up there. Which is why we're not doing one on Friday. But yeah, I've got to go on EasyJet, and pretty much you go on EasyJet, or you go on Ryanair, or you go on some other sort of weirdly named thing like Wizz Air or cheap ass air. And you expect to have to pay for everything. You can't choose a seat. You can't pay more for baggage and all that sort of thing. So I said, but is that?
Well, it is that. It's exactly that. Yeah. But it's just a bit of a pain. So
yes, it is.
We don't travel.
Yeah. Well, that's why it's for youth, not for high-flying execs like you.
So I was always against it for the fact that it is important to have lower price plans. My kids are all on 3, and if you think about it from overall British society point of view, then you do need to have low price options, right? Because if you think of a family of 4 or 5 people, if they're all paying, all right,
30-40 a month.
If it's £30 each, then it becomes a lot of money.
Probably adds up.
So
you're getting close to an electricity bill.
£60
well, that's the point. You're actually miles away from an electricity bill still.
God, yeah.
And I think one of the things is mobile has got pretty cheap. I know if you're
as a utility,
if you're on the sort of lower end of income, it is still a thing to worry about. But for a lot of people, it's a couple of coffees and maybe a pint.
Yeah.
And that's
depending on where you go,
I think it's a Founder's Arms.
Well, you're paying what? £6.50, £7 a pint now in London.
Yeah.
So that's two pints is your monthly phone bill.
Yeah.
You know, so on that level,
it's good.
It's not so bad. And so I'm thinking,
when you think of it that way,
it's much cheaper than the US.
Mine's 60 a month, so mine's a bit more than 2 pints.
British price is really good for
3 pints
for mobile for what you get.
Yeah, no, it is certainly compared to the US. It is.
So it's but I think now it's got to the point where it's got cheap enough, and the networks are just they're okay, they're good, but they could be a lot better, and it's kind of so I've sort of come round really to.
So what are you saying? You're saying now that you're in favour of this merger?
Basically, yeah.
Because their combined resources might help them do a better job. Is that what you're saying?
Rather than overlapping, they all overlap the top areas. Fine, you've got good service there, but as soon as you go, to the countryside, the railway, that sort of thing. It would actually, for most of us, it'd be better to fix those areas now.
Yeah, I'm not sort of opposed to it on the grounds of I don't like the idea of getting down to 3 players. I think there'd still be enough competition to keep prices low, and they're more likely to go up because of inflation matched sort of plans, aren't they? Really at the moment, I think.
There's a lot of barriers, like you said. I think I'm no expert. I know how this all works, so this is literally just punditing for the sake of it.
That's right. That's what we do.
One difference now is that obviously with Britain isn't in the EU, so but there's been quite a bit of change anyway in EU. I had a whole note sent in from someone at Moody's about some court case, and there's this and there's that. So I think it's what's going to be interesting is seeing how British competition policy.
No, I think that's a really good point.
This is a big test for that, isn't it? Really?
Kind of what they think.
I think it's a really good point. I noticed. I noted I had a paragraph of post-Brexit Britain in my thing. I mean, even allowing for the fact that I sometimes like to throw that in just to wind up Ramona's, because that's just what I do.
Although the competition authority is pretty much aligned with the European Commission on the O2.
Yeah, but so the interesting thing is, like politically, if we look at what we've had politically in the UK recently, where we've got this new Prime Minister Liz Truss, and she's
doing really well.
Well, I mean, regardless of what you think of the wisdom of her move, it's notable in its stridence, in its decisiveness. You could even say relative
changing
radicalism.
their minds about the top rate of income tax, you mean?
Yeah, well, then our Chancellor bottled it on that one thing. But the point is, I can't remember the last time a politician rolled the dice like that. Again, regardless of whether you think it's a good roll of the dice or not, it's still significant that it's a go. And I think one of the reasons they did it, and again, I mean, my general view on this political thing is I'm all in favour of the economics of sort of shrinking the size of the state, giving people more money, hopefully being pro-growth. But the politics were badly done. It was very clumsy. They just sort of blurted it out. And you can't blurt out something as radical and as major as that, call it a mini budget, as if they're just going to have a bit of a tinker and maybe give pensioners a couple more quid a week or something like that. So it was badly done, and obviously they didn't communicate with the markets very well because the markets lost their shit. And then you get this knock-on effect of like, well, if the markets are losing their shit, it must be terrible. The fact that everything's bounced back to how it was before is obviously not so reported on. But anyway, the point is...
But in theory, I mean, again, I stress I'm not
expert, we're all just winging it here, mate, don't worry. Get used to it.
The Competition Commission should be like an executive branch. It's not a political organisation.
I know, but I think everything's influenced by politics.
Well, that's the thing.
Nothing lives in a vacuum, does it?
There's a mood around things.
Yeah, exactly. That's my point.
Quite what that'll end up as, I don't know.
I don't know.
So I think Truss is trying to make this point of like, you get these cliches like Singapore on Thames and that sort of thing, which are not particularly helpful. But now that the post-Brexit thing's supposed to be that we can chart our own trajectory, which someone like Liz Truss wants to be pro-growth. Whether she's doing it right or not is another matter. That seems to be her guiding philosophy, and that of her Chancellor as well, Kwasi Kwarteng, who people are unfairly calling Kamikaze. And so my point I made in the story is this probably isn't a bad timing-wise, for Vodafone to try something like this, because if they position...
It looks a little bit opportunistic, doesn't it?
Does a bit, yeah.
It's a good time in one way because of that government change, perhaps, if you think the governments have that much influence over the competition authority, and I don't know, but it's a bad time in other ways because, as I say, anything that looks like this will cause thousands of job cuts, right? you know, the BBC will report this as two companies coming together, thousands of job cuts in you know, coming, and it will lead to price rises probably. But even if they're mainly to do with inflation, they'll say it's because of a merger.
No, you're right.
So it's very hard to get.
Just like it was an incredibly difficult time for Truss and Kwarteng to try this shit when everyone's so skint, to suddenly be giving, you know, that 45% band, getting rid of that. You know, the political message that sent was extremely fraught at a time when everyone's feeling really skint.
The other thing I think is interesting about it, more on the sort of tech side, is because I don't think we've seen this for quite a while in maybe not even Europe, or well, certainly not in the UK, but two big mobile networks sort of coming together, and what that means in terms of integration. They're all using quite different. There's quite a lot of different kind of suppliers in the mix there. You've got Vodafone sort of 2,500 Huawei swap out for Open RAN players going on in the West. You've got, you know, Three having gone heavily in with Ericsson, but it's still got sort of some Nokia and Samsung in there. You've got them both using different core network suppliers. It's like, that seems like quite a big job for a CTO.
Big reconciliation
and then you've got the
job.
whole, you know, sort of consolidation of the estate, I guess, not just on the network side, but closing shops and things, and there's all of that can bog you down a bit if you don't do it well, I think, can't it? That's an integration job. But
that's going to be a important part of it, but I don't get the feeling that's really been much in the thinking of whether they go for it or not.
No, totally. They won't. They'll worry about that afterwards. That's your CTO's
details.
job.
Deets.
Yeah, no, that won't dictate why they do it.
I think they kind of had to find out really as well.
Yeah.
You know, like, are they going to let you or not? And just then you can move on. I was at the Connected Britain while all you guys were at
Copenhagen,
Denmark thing. And they had this question was coming up everywhere, you know, all the exec panels and stuff like that. At some point, we've been talking about it for 4 years more, or ever since 2002. They've got to find out at some point. So, you know, why not?
So
why not find out?
There's been a viral clip going on social media about someone doing a simple chart, X and Y axis, where on the X axis there's find out, and on the y-axis there's fuck around, and it's this sort of spoof thing where he's talking about a directly proportional relationship between fucking around and finding out. And if you fuck around to a 7, you'll find out to a 7. Anyway, it's just, you'd have to see it, but there's a thing. Americans talk about fuck around and find out. So you talking about finding out made me think of that. Anyway.
I think one of the other interesting things about this is if they do allow it to happen, because I'm pretty sure that if they do, there'll be some remedies, you know, as they call them.
Big time.
And then it's what those remedies are, because one of the things that's happened in Europe when they've allowed these sort of 4-3 deals to go ahead is that they haven't really been 4-3 deals, because they've gone, well, you need to sell. They don't go and share the spectrum out among the existing operators. They go and sell it to
re-auction it.
So
give it to
Iliad came in Italy, for instance, and you had
entrant,
you've got 1&1 in Germany at the moment, and it's whether they sort of see an opportunity to let's get an Open RAN player going or something.
See, I would definitely disapprove of them trying to manufacture
because then
a new
you've got
MNO
the same problem almost.
As a remedy. I think that's often a really clumsy remedy. You know, let's say they let Sky become an MNO or something like that as a remedy.
Well, it gives you it's good for Vodafone and Three because they've still got the scale. They're still the biggest operator then, and they've teamed up. But then it creates another sort of challenger in the market that can cause pricing disruption. So they might think that that's a good way of doing it because they're not upsetting anybody. And
they might, now that we're post-Brexit, they might just not worry about those things and just go, fuck it, go for it. Yeah. Let's see what happens. There's one thing I wanted to point out. So Vodafone's argument, so their press release, you know, there's like 2 or 3 paragraphs talking about a deal, and then most of the rest of the press release was just basically indirectly lobbying the CMA, the government, Ofcom, etc. And they go, the UK government rightly sees 5G as a transformational, blah, 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 usual things. The conditions to ensure thriving competition need to be nurtured. Again, the usual sort of stuff. And then it goes, as Ofcom has identified, some operators in the UK, Vodafone UK and Three UK, lack the necessary scale to earn their cost of capital. So the argument they're trying to make is that you've got to have this go through because as things are now, neither us nor Three have got the scale to, and I'll talk about this in a sec because I had a look through this Ofcom paper they're referring to basically have a viable business model as things are right now. they talk about. I looked up. So they talk about this thing called ROCE, return on capital employed.
Yeah, Nick Reed's like a big fan of that. They publish numbers on it now in their annual reports.
Right.
Yeah.
And Vodafone's inferring from its press release, and in this Ofcom thing, they talk about ROCE versus I can't remember what it is. Just the cost of doing shit in the first place, and the cost of doing shit in the first place is something like 8%. So they're saying that your ROCE needs to be in excess of 8%. For you to be up on the deal.
I think it's overly complicated. I think the easiest way to think of it is like you look at what. Do it on a capex basis even. Look at what 3 spends on capital expenditure with its 10 million customers and far fewer revenues to build out a nationwide network. And I think it spent a third of its revenues on capex last year, whereas BT, even with all of its fibre stuff and including licence fees, which are 3 stripped out by the way for that purpose, is on 20-odd%.
Right. Yeah. Well, so there's all sorts of metrics you could use.
They're just you're having to invest a lot more. You've got the same kind of cost base, network size, but you've got fewer customers.
3's been on a big splurge the last couple of years.
That's true, yeah.
As a kind of catch-up from not spending much and maybe preparing it for these kind of a deal. So it's all pretty complicated.
It is, but the point is you've still got a nationwide network to fund with fewer customers and a smaller pool of sales.
Yeah, and it's always been I went to a 3 briefing back in the summer, on the network strategy, etc., etc. I mean, they've always been the cheapest network because the service is on balance. Yeah, coverage isn't the best kind of thing.
Yeah,
a bit shitter.
Yeah.
So the reason I wanted to focus on this, other than the fact that it's an interesting sort of core part of their argument. So they go on to say, by combining our businesses, Vodafone UK and 3UK will gain the necessary scale. So they're stressing scale. To be able to accelerate the rollout of 5G in the UK. And as ever, with all these operators, they always have to position it as some act of philanthropy.
Yeah.
Now, all we really care about is for the UK to be as connected as possible, which we're not, by the way. There have been a couple of things we've reported on this week where we're like 50th in the world in various metrics, including a Omdia one.
I saw that in the email this morning.
Although, I mean...
That was
I think the UK is doing pretty well on sort of gigabit investment. You're coming from a very low position, and how much have you gone up? That's the thing that Omdia
take it up with Omdia, mate. I'm just saying that they got their metric, and we're 53rd in the world.
I don't think there's anywhere else in Europe that's building as fast as the UK at the moment.
Okay. So you're saying their metric is just a snapshot in time.
Yeah. Well,
but you're saying our direction of travel is very positive.
Then we're always going to look shit for a few years, aren't we? But the point is, we've gone from like 6 or 7% fibre coverage to a third in like 3 years or something.
But on a European comparison, UK is pretty poor show.
Do you know who's number 1 on that Omdia list? Romania.
It's bad, but more improved than anywhere else in Europe.
It's making. I went to this Connected Britain thing I was saying about at the design centre. It's all about fibre to the home, altnets,
fibre to the yacht,
OpenReach, all of that sort of stuff.
Fibre to the shed.
Yeah. I was well out of my depth.
Fibre to the bog.
That's quite a busy event usually, I think, from when I've been in the past. It's always been well attended, and because there's so much money going into it, I guess.
So the reason I keep banging on about this is I got an email and it was sent on background. I mean, I could name who I got it from because I didn't agree to any kind of embargo, but I'll be discreet. But I'll let you and our audience join the dots as to who would be likely to send such an email. And it's basically saying that Vodafone, in its press release, said, as Ofcom has identified, some operators in the UK, us and 3, lack the necessary scale to earn their cost of capital. And this email says, actually, they never described 3 or Vodafone as subscale in that paper, which I've then gone and read about.
Right.
And I'm reading, there's the one paragraph which they're probably referring to. This is 6.16 in this paper that was, I'm not going to scroll up because it'll take me forever to find my place again. But I think it was back in like February of this year that Ofcom, a really long paper, like 77 pages on a PDF. It says, in a well-functioning competitive market, not all market participants may earn similar levels of return. As figure 6.2 shows, some MNOs have earned higher returns than others in recent years. Vodafone and 3 may have not covered their cost of capital So that's the key sort of sentence. If ROCE, as I mentioned earlier, brackets on an economic basis, which is a qualifier that we won't get into now, was to fall or was expected to fall below the cost of capital for a sustained period of time, for any MNO, this could dampen its incentive to invest. So it's clearly this paragraph they've latched onto as saying, look, even Ofcom reckons we need to get together. But this email I got from this unnamed person is going, but we never spoke about subscale. So I think it's a minor own goal by Vodafone. They've taken some liberties with what Ofcom wrote. So what Ofcom's written is they've noted, and actually in this report there's quite an interesting chart, that ROCE for Vodafone and 3 is a lot lower than everyone else.
Yeah.
So they are definitely doing worse by this metric. So, which is the return on capital invested.
But it's a logical. I mean, all right. They've maybe they shouldn't have sort of said subscale and implied that Ofcom had said that.
Well, exactly.
But the logic's there, isn't
the logic? No, the logic's fine.
We've had this discussion before. We don't want one network in a country because then you've got a monopoly.
Yeah, but we don't want a million either.
20 networks that are all national because they're all going to have only a few million subscribers.
So what's the optimum point?
And then even if they spend 30% of their sales on network build out, you're still going to get a fairly crappy sort of amount of investments. So you need some optimum point.
Yes,
and that's been
which could be 3 or 4.
Thing about do we have 3 or 4? That seems to be the point that a lot of
and I take all that on board.
At,
but I'm just saying this is a sort of technical communications point. I just think it was sloppy and a bit of a self-own for them to misquote the Ofcom thing.
Yeah,
for then people to then bother to reach out to me to correct that mistake. They must have known that they were taking liberties.
No one reached out to me and said, "Oh, there's a fuck up here."
I'll show you after. And if by doing that they've antagonised Ofcom, that's an even bigger self-own because they presumably need Ofcom on board for this fucking thing to go through.
Yeah.
So a bit of a mistake there. I can imagine they might have rushed this out, although I don't know if that Sky News report was a genuine scoop or if it was a controlled leak type of thing that I've spoken about before. But
it looked more like the latter, didn't it?
Looked a bit controlled.
You know.
In which case, they don't even have haste as their excuse for doing this. I think they were just taking liberties. And anyway, that's that. So we haven't got too much time left. Gabe, as our guest, do you have any last thoughts on this merger? Whether it's likely to happen, whether it would be a good thing? any thoughts?
So this is the hard thing. Is it likely to happen or not?
Yeah,
I don't know. I think it's pretty hard to call. I think it probably.
If you had to give it a odds, like a percentage chance,
51.
I think I'd go lower. Just because
I think it's more likely than not to happen. Probably.
Yeah, I think it's more likely to not happen. Just because I'd like it to happen. I'm all in favour of it.
These types of reviews, there's a special designation it's got under the Competition Authority now. They never ever get approved. Apparently,
right.
They set a precedent if this one does get.
Yeah,
and the CMA goes, we're going to have a proper butchers at this.
Markets Authority, not
your chart's showing it, isn't it? You got it on the chart there. Your return on capital chart.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it might go through, but I think there'll be fairly heavy sort of remedies, and they could include, maybe trying to get a new entrant in.
Yes, which I just think would be silly. I think there should be remedies, and these things should be regulated. No one's saying we don't.
Well, you can't really regulate for a new entrant, but you could say you've got to allocate some capacity for MVNOs. That's what happened in Germany, wasn't it? And then
they start.
And then the MVNO buys some spectrum and builds its own network. But that's different to.
It is. Yeah, you've got to sort of hope that might happen.
Yeah. In the US, it was more like that, wasn't it? With Dish, they said, well, as long as Dish. Commits to this many sites, you can merge.
T-Mobile,
and sort of some variant of that sort of logic, anyway, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Another thing by that chart, by the way, that you were referring to, noticing that the non-dotted line black is the average, and the return on capital employed is just going down as an industry average in the UK as well, which is interesting, isn't it? Yeah,
so one of the really big things the industry needs is...
So that's Vodafone, that's 3.
Better pricing. It's not brilliant if you're a customer, but it's what the industry needs to keep going.
Yeah, well, and we've had this
that expensive, so I think it's kind of.
Yeah, we've had this chat. In fact, we had this chat in the context of I think it's in the last pod when we were talking about how operators are constantly lobbying for big tech to have to chip in to networks because people like YouTube and Netflix and all that provide most of the traffic. But the flip side of it is, well, if you didn't have these very low unmetered tariffs in the first place, it wouldn't be an issue. So is that their fault? Anyway.
Well, you're forced into it, I know, but through competition.
Well, quite.
To some extent, it's good, but maybe it's too far.
No, you're completely right. If someone suddenly started not offering unmetered tariffs, or especially on fixed line, of course, it'd be ridiculous to have a metered tariff on your broadband. Then no one will go with them. Quite rightly. So yeah, you're right. There are competition forces. Okay, we've got about sort of 10 or so minutes left. So we're just very quickly. Ian, you went to Paris. What was that all about?
Oh, okay.
We've run out of time, so I've had to hurry it along.
It was an update with Orange Business Services, which is the sort of enterprise bit of Orange.
Okay.
It's quite big. It's like 30,000 employees, I think, and annual revenues of about 8 billion euros. But it's got the same problem that enterprise units usually have in telecom, which is there's a lot of legacy stuff that they're just not making money out of anymore. It's sort of dying. And they're struggling to position themselves in these sort of growth markets like cloud and systems integration and cybersecurity, because there's quite a lot of competition there. So they were really actually quite upfront about it, saying that when they started out trying to do cloud stuff, they envisaged a much bigger role for themselves than they've ended up with. And they're now having to sort of have an accommodation with the public clouds, and it's more about supporting operators who are trying to work with Google and Microsoft and Amazon through things like you basically, it's quite a big DevOps job for a company to work with the public clouds. You need people to sort of be able to sort of use all their different systems. So what Orange Business Services is trying to do is take away some of that effort and be the kind of glue between the different clouds. But the really interesting about it is they've got a new CEO. She's only been there since May, I think.
The overall Orange CEO?
No, but business as well.
Business services.
Right. Aliette, I'm going to pronounce her name wrong, but Aliette Mousnier-Lampre, I think is her name. She used
Sounds
to
like
be
good effort. Better
she
than I
used to
would
be a
have
professional footballer.
No way.
Yeah, so she used to play professional football for Paris Saint-Germain, not like a crap team either, like Paris Saint-Germain women's team. And she's only like 39 years old still.
And now she's
now running Orange Business Services. She's one of these
bloody
people who's
overachieving
good
people.
at everything and sort of speaks flawless English without an accent and everything. But she was. It was good because they did their sort of presentations. It's one of the customer events. There's lots of partners there, people milling about in this venue near the Louvre, and then they had her on stage, and me and the other two journalists who were there.
Do a bit of keepy uppy.
I was going to say, can you do some keepy uppy skills on the stage? You could sort of video it.
Great minds think alike, Ian.
But she sat down and gave us like
business.
half an hour of her time answering questions, and again, really sort of. Though we were talking about Scott Petty earlier, people who sort of answer questions.
She speaks good English.
Speaks good English and doesn't shy away from, we've got because their profits basically crashed this year, and one of the issues they face is, everybody's struggling with energy bills and inflation, but one of the challenges for them is talent, actually, recruiting the right people they need for some of these opportunities they're trying to get into. And she's really upfront about speaking about all of this, and she got asked about 5G and was kind of, we haven't really seen any impact yet. It's interesting, and we want to be there, and there is a good enterprise thing, but it's just not there. So it's kind of good to meet her, and cool. She's really impressive.
And was it just
a leader? I think
you just went over. Did you? You had one night there? Did you?
I had one. Literally went over there on the afternoon. Went out for dinner. The day
that
was
nice place you were saying.
The nice place, yeah, and it was Orange Business Services Summit. So it was basically them with. Customers, partners, and
like
press,
a pan-European
and
thing.
doing demos as well of things that they provide. Actually, the Orange Group CEO was there as well. She did an on-stage thing with some of their customers, but she wasn't sort of available for press questions or anything. If she had been, I guess they'd have had Les Echos there and all the others sort of hounding her about net neutrality and stuff like that, no doubt. But she was there as well. So it was a really good event.
Orange does quite a lot. That I keep having to turn them down. I apologise, Orange. They keep inviting me over to France for this, that, and the other. It's just it just hasn't been convenient for me. We got quite a packed schedule towards the end of the year, haven't we?
Yeah. Well, there weren't many people. The only other people there were Yanitza, who we know from Telecom TV, and a lady called Anne-Marie Corvin, who sounds French. Actually, her name
rings a bell.
She works for a company called Tech Informed. and not necessarily strictly telco, like writing basically about digital transformation in other industries.
Yeah.
But there was only those two and me. There were some French journalists there, but they were sort of kept apart from us. You don't want to mix with the French riffraff, obviously. So
yeah, it's just giving you derisory looks, roast beef.
But
cool.
yeah, no, it was a really good event. Yeah, and they organise those things well. So.
And you had dinner. Did they take you out and get you pissed after?
No. It was the first time I've gone out for a dinner with just a bunch of women on a press trip. Those was me.
So it was you, and then
so it was the Orange PR people, which was Krista and a lady in Paris called Christelle, Amory and Yanitza and me.
Right, so it's you. So
I think every other time
women.
there's been someone like Gabe there, or
right.
So I was sort of in the minority for once.
Right.
But, so we had the meal, and then we went for a walk around down to the church, Notre Dame.
Okay.
Which has got loads of the cathedral, got loads of scaffolding around it at the moment, obviously, because it's still being rebuilt.
But oh God, because it was burnt, didn't it?
Yeah. And then
that was nice.
So we did quite a lot of walk. It's quite nice Paris at night. I know people sort of, it's a bit of a cliche, but
No,
it's really kind of
it's cool.
It is really kind of nice walking along the banks of the Seine at night time.
It's cool, and it never got bombed. So there's lots of old buildings.
They had a
pretty
VR, version of it at the NGMN Orange.
What, VR Paris?
VR Notre Dame, being really how it used to be, how it might be again.
What? How they're going to rebuild it?
The rebuilding is good so far. The bits they've done.
They're
going to make it God World.
God's Resort.
Cool. Okay. And do you think that whatever their sort of core message about their business activities, does it seem, because Orange does seem to be one of the more busy operators when it comes to diversification?
Yeah, I mean, she's got some big ideas about how to restructure the group. So one of the things she wants to do is they've always reported on product lines in the past. She's trying to make it more about geographies. Similar to sort of some of the changes that Pekka Lundmark made, I think, when he came in at Nokia, and you try and restructure things to do with how you think the appetite for buying is really. And people don't want to sort of just go and buy. It's a little bit the other way around from what he's saying, but she's saying we need to sort of have sales teams incentivized to sell all the different things that we do, and not just sort of look at someone going out there and trying to sell a cloud service or something. Look at what customers want. So there's quite a lot of restructuring going on, which might mean, given some of their profit problems, might mean like job cuts, but didn't go into details on that. Obviously, they're not going to say we're about to lay off 15,000 employees or anything. So it's a business that needs kind of turning around. So she's new. She's been there since May, I think, but she sounds really capable. She's got big ideas. She's got she's quite upfront about the challenges, and
well, that's always nice, isn't it? Like we were talking earlier about sort of changing the guards at Vodafone. I mean, we don't know what goes on behind the scenes. We don't know what they're like to work for or what they're like as colleagues, but we do know how they present themselves to us, and so I think, and it's obviously not a prerequisite to be a senior exec that you are skillful at talking to the press. But I'm like you. I like to get a sense of sort of some degree of energy, dynamism, confidence.
Yeah.
Someone who just meets your gaze and just seems to be up for it. So if that's the impression you got from her, then that sounds good.
And the bits they're doing, these growth areas are growing. I think it's cloud, cybersecurity, and data are their big sort of three categories that they class as growth areas, and then the legacy business is sort of going like that, as you'd expect. Right. So they're growing at double-digit rate, the growth areas, but it's just not enough to offset the decline in the other areas. Yeah. So,
cool. Okay, I'm not going to ask you about that because you weren't there and all that. But so I think if it's all right, unless you've got anything else you want to pipe up about, we'll wrap it up there because Pierre's got shit to do. I've been good, haven't I, Pierre? Keep an eye on the time. And so this is recorded on a Tuesday. It presumably go up on Wednesday. Do you think it'll go up tomorrow, Pierre? And we're not going to do one on Friday because I'm off on this stag trip in Amsterdam. So it'll be in about a week and a half's time that you'll get the next one. So thanks a lot for listening, and make sure you join us for that one.